As you know, we're in a series unpacking John chapter 1. And Dr. Klink on Monday said that this word, this cosmic word that was there and through which all things were made, is actually the same word, the same Jesus that gave us the right to become children of God. He is both transcendent and immanent. And on Wednesday, Fred Sanders said, our deepest need is Jesus, and our second deepest need is to know that our deepest need is Jesus. And so we're moving through John, just trying to stay close to Jesus as we begin this year in John 1. And today we have Professor John Anderson. I guess he needs no introduction, but I'm going to go ahead anyway. He teaches, this semester he's teaching contemporary art history and drawing and painting. Clearly he's from the art department. He's got shows right now at Evangel University, which I think is Barry Corey's undergraduate alma mater. And recently he just, LA Metro commissioned some artists to create some art that they wanted to post around the city relevant to LA Metro, and they picked his and paid him for it. Isn't that cool? So you'll see his art around the city. He's a distinguished drawing and painting. He received an award for distinguished drawing and painting at Long Beach when he was there. Shown in lots of places. He's just a dear brother, and it's so appropriate that we sang "Be Thou My Vision" because he's going to talk to us a little bit about vision. Because John 1 tells us that not everyone recognizes or sees Jesus for who he is. So John, why don't you come here and let me pray for you, and just appreciate you. Lord, I do thank you for John. I thank you that he's like so many faculty here who are doing their thing that they're good at, but they're always asking, Lord, where are you in this? How do you inform what I do, in this case, art and art history? I thank you that he is someone who thinks deeply about these things, but also admits the Spirit into the deep places of his thinking. So thank you for him. Thank you that he's with us these last 4 years. Just bless him now as he comes and brings your word. In Jesus' name, amen. Welcome, John Anderson.
Amen. Thank you. Well, thank you for that. It is really good to be here this morning. I actually considered a deep honor to be here. And as Dr. Pickett brought up, I'm continuing this series on John 1, but I'm not a proper theologian, and I'm not even a proper biblical scholar. I am an artist, and I'm here to speak as an artist. Hopefully, I'm an artist who's theologically deep and biblically faithful, but I'm an artist. I believe that the cultural space to which I've been called to work out my salvation with fear and trembling is the space of the visual arts. And I only bring that up because I think that points out something that I really love about this place, about Biola University, and that is that it's a university devoted to the gospel. We are many different kinds of people, and we are trying to understand the world in many different kinds of ways, many different areas of understanding, affirming that all of them are valuable ways of cultivating the earth under the lordship of Jesus. And we're reading the Bible together. We're grappling with the text as a body through many different voices and many different concerns. So anyway, that's just a way of appreciating what we're doing here. So you're going to have today a meditation on the gospel by an artist. So with that in mind, we turn again to John 1. And in their talks, Dr. Klink and Dr. Sanders pointed us to the massively proportioned words at the beginning of John's gospel, in the beginning. And with this, John invites us to reread Genesis 1 in another light, a light that seems to illumine some text held in between the lines of Genesis 1. John seems to say, you know that profound speech of God in Genesis 1, the creative word, and God said, let there be. That speech, that creative word, is not an it, and it's not just an event, it's a person, it's a thou. It's a person who is from the unthinkable beginning, both with God and is God. And it is, in fact, this living word through whom all of existence comes into existence, as verse 3 tells us. To exist at all, for anything to be or have being, is to be through this person's being. And this radical claim of John's first 3 verses launches us into the text we're going to consider today. So if you have your Bibles, you can open to John 1, or it should be on the text or on the screen here in a moment. John 1, 4 through 11. In him was life, and that life was the light of mankind. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not grasped it, or overcome it, or understood it. There came a man who was sent from God. His name was John. He came as a witness to testify about that light, so that through him all people might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, and his own did not receive him. This passage introduces to us what I think is the central dynamic tension, even crisis, around which the entire Gospel of John coheres. Verse 4, in him was life. Was life. The living word through whom all things exist is the word of life. It's the speaking of life. All life is a gift from the eternal depth of his own life. And as John's prologue unfolds, he proceeds to make a mind-bending claim, and that is that this creative living word became flesh and tabernacled among us in fully human, historical, creaturely particularity. This claim is mind-bending for numerous reasons, not least of which is that 18 chapters later, we're going to see this guy hanging on a cross, dying under the authority of a Roman emperor. The source of all life passes through death at the hands of those to whom he gave life, and those to whom he came to give life anew. That's mind-bending, and it is extremely tense. The central tension here is, I think, immediately obvious. The word of life comes among us and is not received. In fact, he's not even recognized very often. And this tension troubles the reader all the way through the gospel. Jesus' mission statement rings out from John's text at multiple points. In chapter 10, he says, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I'm not laughing about the verse, yeah. And yet, over and over, doubt and confusion and the failure to recognize the person who's coming to give life to the full is not recognized. Doubt and confusion and failure to recognize him and welcome him plagues John's gospel. And I'll put it in terms that are that strong. If you don't read John's gospel and feel extraordinary tension, you're not reading very closely. You're not getting inside of the text. John builds this tension through numerous images and metaphors. Jesus speaks of himself as the living water, the bread of life, a nurturing, protective shepherd, a flourishing vine, and so on. There are several more. But the most consistent metaphor that's used throughout the gospel, and it's the one that's given to us in the passage that we read today, that we're dealing with today, is the connection between life and light. If we pick up where we left off, back in verse 4, we find it there. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. And this device is used repeatedly. In chapter 8, Jesus makes the connection blatant when he says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. What does it mean to connect light and life in that way? What kind of metaphor is that? How does that make sense? What does it mean for the light of life to shine onto a human person or into a human person? John doesn't really clarify his terms. It seems like he just expects us to know what he's talking about. He expects his readers to know what he's talking about. And I think there are several biblical footholds that we could grab onto in order to interpret this metaphor. Perhaps human lives should be understood to be like plants who need the face of God to shine upon them, as is the prayer in Numbers 6. And in this, the health of one's life can be measured by the fruit that is produced under the light of God's face. And there are lots of references to that in the Old Testament especially. Or perhaps human life is like a mirror or a prism whose being is created to refract or reflect the light of God, the image of God. A human's light is not his own, and the extent to which he has become a darkened, cloudy glass is the extent to which the true source of life is prevented from refracting in him and through him in all of the ways that God intends. These are both significant ways of understanding this metaphor, this connection between light and life. But I think that the one that I want to focus on tonight, and the one that I think is most appropriate to the passage that we're looking at this morning, is that a truly human life seems to involve a certain kind of vision, a capacity to be filled with light and to see the world rightly, like a pilgrim who is able to behold the world around her and thus able to really encounter another and to follow another through this world in the way of life. And that requires a kind of vision, that following, that walking that Jesus brought up in the passage I quoted from chapter 8. For Jewish readers of John's Gospel, numerous loaded Old Testament passages would spring immediately to mind, including Isaiah 9, where it says, "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the shadow of death, a light has dawned." And a few verses later, you have the famous, "For unto us a child is born. To us a son is given." The light shining in the darkness in this passage is God's Messiah, come to dispel death in the way that light dispels darkness. It is the Messiah coming to lead his people out of their darkness like a pillar of fire, guiding a new Exodus people out of their slavery. The light of life is one that reveals the world as it is, as it truly is, and that leads people out of their deathly, blinding darkness. Leads us out of the shadow that has fallen across all of us. John seems to cry out, this light has come into the very shadow of death. And most of us who were there didn't see it, couldn't see it. And why couldn't we see it? I think that's an honest question. When the light of the world shines in the darkness, it looks something like this. Behold the living word. Behold the light of life. What? Who has eyes to see that? Who has eyes to see that as light of life? The light of life. The light that has come to give life to the full. I don't know that I have eyes to see that. Or if I do see that, it's through a clouded, dark glass. And why couldn't we see it? If Jesus is the light of the world, the one who truly reveals the world and leads our exodus out of death, and he does so not simply as a transcendent abstraction, but as a first century man who was fully flesh, who was fully human, who walked among us, who made his dwelling among us, who was seen by us. And if this light is given for the life of the world, then how is it that there's such a pervasive failure to perceive this light, and to receive this life? How is it that he's so poorly recognized by us? The 10th verse of the prologue of John seems to cry out in confusion, I think frustration. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to what was his own. All of this is his own. Whether you want to be or not, you're his own. And his own did not receive him. If in John's terms, this is the light that gives light to every man, to the entire world, then what else can explain our failure to recognize him other than an insidious and profound kind of blindness? John's gospel repeatedly features doubt and the failure to recognize the one in whom there is true life and true light. And this is a blindness that creates in us a kind of darkness, a negation, a confusion, a death, the shadow of death. And this shadow is not solely a darkness that casts over us from outside of us, it's a blindness. It's a darkness produced inside of us by our inability to perceive his light, which is washing over us constantly. And at this point, I think it's necessary that we to say that blindness is often not an either-or issue. And the way I'm going to talk about it today is not an either-or issue. As though either I see or I don't see. Rather, vision and blindness come in qualitative degrees, and often they're all wrapped up with each other. They happen simultaneously. The blindness I'm going to speak about today, for the remainder of the time, does not simply dissipate once one begins to follow Jesus. Blindness is still a profound problem for the follower of Jesus. As is evidenced by each of the disciples over the course of the gospel, after they have been called by Jesus and after they have spent close personal time with him, following him. And as is evidenced by your life and by my life. I think I have witnessed and been encountered by the light of life, and yet I continue to see it as through a dark glass, to borrow Paul's language. So in the time that remains this morning, I want to explore the subject of blindness, and I want to do so as an artist. And I want to do so kind of looking at the blindness that impacts not just the unbeliever, but the believer. The blindness that keeps me from following Jesus more truly. And I want to meditate on the metaphor, so I think I'll kind of go back and forth between talking about physical vision and physical blindness and metaphorical, spiritual vision and blindness. I'm someone, as an artist, who's particularly preoccupied with seeing well. And all of my years as an art student, as an art teacher, have deeply impressed upon me that vision is not a simple thing. You don't see nearly what you think you see. And the main idea that we'll get at is that I think blindness is not just a matter of not seeing something, it is a way of seeing blindness. It's the blindness I'm going to talk about today is a blindness that happens during vision. It accompanies vision. It might even be a byproduct of vision, the way that we go about seeing. So, off we go. Usually when we encounter or use the term blindness, we're referring to a physiological failure of the eyes, right? Due to either genetic dysfunction, those who are born blind, or due to disease, those who go blind, or due to a violent event, those who are made blind by injury. And all of these examples are tragic, and I think we could certainly utilize these in our understanding of the metaphor that John gives us. It seems evident, both from the biblical witness and our own life experiences, that all of us are damaged in our ability to correctly make sense of the world. Our hearts and our minds and our bodies have suffered injury and various hereditary diseases of generational sin. And they've deeply impaired our ability to receive the light of life. In this respect, the man born blind in John 9 serves as a metaphor for all of us, and many of us need the radical kind of healing, I think, spiritually, that Jesus grants to that man in chapter 9. But I'm not so sure that this is the most helpful way of thinking about this metaphor, because it still falls into that either-or category. It makes it seem like either we see or we don't. And I think that could lead to a whole lot of self-deception about the extent to which you and I continue to be blind and continue to struggle with blindness. I'm interested in how blindness might be operative in our own lives as redeemed Christians. The blindness that most of us suffer from is far more subtle than just physiological malfunction. For starters, even the most perfectly functioning human eye is blind to the vast majority of light in the world. In physical terms, when we refer to light, what we're talking about is wavelengths of electromagnetic energy. And I'm not going to get into this too far, but a typical human eye sees wavelengths between about 390 nanometers and 750 nanometers, give or take. Just outside of these wavelengths, slightly longer or slightly shorter are frequencies of light that are not perceivable to us, like infrared or ultraviolet. You're certainly familiar with those. Many other creatures, however, can see these frequencies. Take a bumblebee, for instance. Bumblebees can see ultraviolet light, which is one of the ways that they find pollen in flowers. And in fact, most flowers that depend on pollination from insects owe their success, their lives, to how they appear in ultraviolet light, not how they appear to us. The bee and I see very different things in the same field of experience, the same situations. I have eyes to see, but they're blind to most of what the bumblebee sees, and I think vice versa. This alone might convince us that what appears to us hardly exhausts all that is there in front of us. Even further outside of the visible spectrum are lights, more lights, like X-rays and gamma rays, microwaves, radio waves, and so on. Those are all light. Many of these we've learned to use. We've learned to record them using technologies that translate them into wavelengths that we can see. But the fact is that the entirety of visible light, all colors that you will ever see, are less than 1% of the known electromagnetic spectrum. And this brings up an important point. True blindness is not what you see in a black room with your eyes closed. In those cases, you're still seeing, your eyes are functioning, but you have nothing to register. Rather, true blindness is a total lack of a particular perception altogether. True blindness is not like standing in a dark room. It's more like how you can't imagine how a bat can see using sonar. Do you have any idea what that experience would be? If you do, you have a richer imagination than I do. Or perhaps it's like Mr. Square from Edwin Abbott's Flatland, for those of you who are familiar with it. He's a two-dimensional being, and Mr. Square has no resources for imagining how it's possible that he could be on this page, for instance. The entirety of his experience would be within the cross-section of this page. He has no resources for imagining how it's possible that I could be right here and have access to his insides. He has no way of imagining what that would be. He looks around and this is the world. Where is a third dimension? What does it mean to be three-dimensional? That's more like blindness. Not blackness, it's total oblivion to a certain experience, a certain something in front of you. And don't get me wrong, I don't think we should be too bothered about all of this, about what you don't see. After all, we're created as humans to experience the world in particular ways, and that particularity is good. The only reason I bring it up is that I think it fosters a posture of humility. You don't see nearly as much as you think you do. And beyond just our physical limitation, I think we're limited in what we do see, what does fall within the wavelengths of light that we can experience. We see an astonishingly little of that as well. And I can illustrate that by returning for a moment to our example of the bumblebee. There are many more significant reasons why my perception is different than the bee's. He and I care about different things. We're concerned about different things. And our respective cares and concerns deeply influence how we pay attention to the world. And in fact, what we see in the world around us, even if we're looking at the exact same environment. And because this has to do with our cares, this not only separates bee vision from human vision, it causes humans to see things very differently from each other. It's simply not possible to be attentive to the entirety of your field of experience. The world is far, far too dense with meaningful relations. You're able to perceive only a tiny fraction of the light that's actually coming into your eyes and what's registering in your mind. It's too dense. If you look at this photo, for instance, what do you see? Do you see a series of colored shapes distributed across the projection screen? Or do you go further with it? Do you look first to faces? Which faces? Those making eye contact? Do you look at the backs of heads or pass over them? Or do you go to the upper half of the image? After all, the people are only about half of the image. How would a fashion designer look at this picture? A fashionista. How would a fitness instructor look at this picture? A psychologist, an anatomy instructor. Can you see what the zygomatic process is doing underneath the skin of the people? How would a graphic designer look at this image? I know people who are fairly obsessed with typography and font. Did you even notice? And notice that as you glance at the signs, you almost entirely avoid the space immediately surrounding those signs. Have you seen how the color blue is distributed throughout the image? Consider what it would look like if you didn't understand the language that was on the signage. How would you look at this if you were a cab driver, an electrical engineer, an ethnographer, a real estate agent, someone who worked in a factory that machined light poles for major metropolitan areas? Consider how much of this image you haven't seen yet. And if you're actually in this situation, you wouldn't be given the luxury of the minute or whatever that we've been looking at this image. It would all fly by, seeing almost none of it. Almost none of it. We've been created to pay attention to the world. And we've been created such that the attention we give is directed by our cares, our concerns. And what shapes our cares and our concerns? How does what you know shape what you pay attention to? How do your memories? How does your community? We edit out tons of information coming through our senses every moment, the vast, vast majority of sensory input, more than we can ever say. And we do so in order to allow us to pay attention to what it is we care about in our field of experience. Our cares, our concerns, our interests, our knowledge, our memories, our affections, ultimately our loves, are largely responsible for our visual editing process. And I think this is a good thing. It allows us to single out particular meaningful relations to focus on in the midst of an overwhelmingly meaningful world and an extraordinarily thick world. The downside, however, is that it means that we're radically and necessarily blind to most of our experiences. And that's a problem, that's a downside, if you're paying attention to the wrong things. What happens if I care about the wrong things? What happens if I've been spending most of my life developing habits of mind and habits of heart and habits of body that are orienting me towards the world in misdirected, unfruitful ways? What if my cares are misdirected? And this kind of blindness, I think we need to recognize, is operative within what we consider to be perfectly clear vision. None of you are blind. All of you are incredibly blind. And you're blinded by your desires. And again, that's a good thing, but we need to keep in check what it is that is shaping our desires, shaping our loves. So I have a lot more to say about all of this. Obviously, you can talk to me sometime. But I want to leave you with something that is somewhat more practical. Questions. First, I think our response is to pray. Pray as though you are a man born blind and you need healing. I think that's appropriate. With the Father in Mark 9, I do believe, please help me in my unbelief. I do see, please help me in my blindness. But secondly, I think we need to consider the extent to which our spiritual eyes are already working but have been poorly trained and misused. Your attentiveness toward the world is not neutral, and it's not objective. It is extensively shaped by what you value and what you're concerned with, what you expect. And if that's true, then it seems like we need to pay close attention to what is shaping our development of those affections. So, 3 questions. First, and I'm going to leave you with these questions. What kind of vision am I preparing myself for? The way you looked at that photograph was not just a spur-of-the-moment kind of neutral, objective take on it. You were prepared for it. You've been preparing for it all of your life. And you're preparing all of your life to see what you're seeing now. How are you prepared? And part of that question is, what kind of posture do I have? Which direction am I looking? Do I have my head up or down? Secondly, what dominates your memory? That's part of what is preparing us. What histories, what stories are you a part of? And how are those stories shaping what you're looking for and what you're longing after? And third question, and then I'll let you go, is what kind of a community are you part of? The ways that we see each other are significantly impacted by our communities. The way that we see each other and the way that we see with each other. What kind of community are you part of, and how's that community shaping your vision and your blindness? We'll end with that. I'll bless you, and then you'll be dismissed. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Go in the Lord. The Lord go with you.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.